Hey, so welcome to We Learn Wednesday on Sunday, which is kind of strange, but it was a really busy week. And once I got past Tuesday Drive, there were a couple of other things that had to be thrown in that took up Wednesday, and the week was just nuts beyond that. And so I wasn't actually able to get to We Learn Wednesday, but so since I'm not able to be outside, man, it's just crazy out there. Here, let me show you. Uh, it is like ice. It is like icy, and people are going to be without power, and it's just going to be a mess. And so yesterday was bad weather, and today is bad weather. Um, and I've been having audio problems, so I've got a new cable on order, hopefully solve that. So I'm now taping, hoping that you can hear me, so I don't have to do this all over again. But anyway, what I want to talk about today is an introduction to linear perspective. I think that's the next logical step in our progression here. And so, as you know, my goal is to try and keep it as simple as possible and not overcomplicate it. Because if it's, I mean, we have enough to think about when we're out painting, right? I mean, if it's super complicated, it just makes it even harder. So I'm going to make an attempt to simplify it for you, and hopefully you can follow along. I'm going to use a simple subject that that you will likely encounter. I'm surrounded by farms and barns and buildings that are out in the middle of a field or next to a house or whatever. But these basic rules apply across the board. So, and anytime you set up and you start your plein air painting, the first thing you want to do anyway is you want to establish a horizon line, and this applies to whether or not you have a building or a man-made object in your painting or not. You still want to establish the horizon line, and the best way to do that is just stand looking straight out from you. And as you do that, if you just take your brush and you just hold it up at eye level and look straight ahead, that will identify for you, just with your arms straight out, that will identify for you where your actual horizon is. Because it's important to know where the actual horizon is, because sometimes we have hills and things like that that are actually in between you and the horizon, but your rules for buildings and things are still going to be applying to the actual horizon, not the apparent horizon, which might be the top of a hill or something. And maybe I can show you an example of that here. So anyway, I'll get the camera flipped around, and I'll let's get going. All right, so as I mentioned a second ago, the first thing we want to do is just establish that horizon line, and I'm placing it somewhere down here on this lower third of the canvas, and just drop that in there. And for this particular exercise, I'm gonna, when you're in the field, what you would actually do is, when you're looking at a building or something, you would hold up your brush and determine some of the angles of the sides of the building, and the kind of the length of the front of the building, and later on I'll actually do a video and talk to you about site sizing, but here I just really want to talk about perspective. And so I've sort of predetermined a couple of vanishing points. And okay, so here's where the audio quit, and after some searching I actually figured out why the audio quit, and it turns out it was just my fault. But here I've got the two vanishing points established, and I think starting with 2-point perspective is going to be better than starting with one. And the because it's going to be more similar to what you might encounter when you're actually out painting a barn or something, the very first thing I do is I lay in this front corner of the building, because typically it's going to be one of the longest vertical lines, and so I use that kind of as a measurement for everything else. And it's important that these remain completely vertical, unless the building is actually slanted or something. And the gestures I just made just say that all of the horizontal lines to the left of this line are going to go to the left vanishing point. All the horizontal lines to the right are going to actually go to the vanishing point that's on the right. And I use my brush kind of as a reference line. And I wanted to point out here that if your vanishing point is off of your canvas, you can actually use a brush to do that measurement and use it as a reference point. And in this case, I was kind of using the end of the ferrule, the silver part there, as the vanishing point. But for this exercise, I'm going to keep them on the canvas just so we can have that reference point and you'll be able to see them. And what I do is I hold the brush on the point where my line is going to start, and I use the back end of the brush as a guide. And as I'm dragging this line, I'm actually going to be keeping the back end of the brush on the vanishing point, so that will allow me to get an accurate line here. So this is the bottom edge of this building on the right hand side, and here's for the bottom edge of the building on the left hand side. And I just do the same thing. I just kind of drag the brush, keeping it in line with the vanishing point, and I just need enough of a line there where I can see it well. Now we'll lay in what'll be the front of this barn. It's just another vertical line, and I can overdraw it. It doesn't really matter, because when I pull my line to the next vanishing point from the top here, I'll just go right through that line, and which won't make any difference. But I'm just going to go from that point. I'm going to drag that through, and so now you can see that's the front of the barn. And then this will be the side that most of the barn is facing us. So just draw a nice vertical line there, and I'm using a reference point to the side of the canvas. And sometimes if it's that close to the canvas, I may even drag my finger along. And I'm doing the same thing here on the right side. I'm using my brush to keep alignment with the vanishing point. And we'll just pull this line through. And I'm just going to kind of wipe out these other lines just to prevent any confusion. Now for the peak, I'm just kind of finding the middle of that line, deciding how high the point of the peak will be, and then I'm just getting that in there right away. So we'll generate that, and then again I'm using my brush as a guide so that I drag through the right point where the roof comes down on this side. It actually stems a little bit of an overhang a little beyond that point, so I came through just a little, and as you can guess, that point, because it's on the right side of that corner vertical, is going to go to the vanishing point on the right hand side. So we just do the same thing, we just drag that through. And now we'll do the top roof line using the exact same technique. And then we'll just go over this line and darken it a little bit. And I'm just trying to make sure that it is indeed going to the right location there. And then I'll use my brush to match this angle of the roof line on this side. And then I'll come back here and I'll just pull my brush through so that I end up creating that same angle to the rear of the barn. Now we're looking at this barn maybe as if we were sitting on the ground because we have a very kind of a interesting low viewpoint to it, but that's no problem. And I'm just going to kind of color in this roof just so we have a solid panel here, rather than leave it open. I think it may actually help you visualize it better. And I'm just correcting that angle on the back a little bit. It got a little bit vertical on me, so. And I'll just get rid of these kind of this horizon line and just clean that up a little bit so that so you can actually see the shape of the barn better. That looks better, actually. All right, so we'll put a door in the front of it just so I can show you that these lines that are plumb in buildings, they're built vertical, so you want to make sure these lines stay vertical. And then just as the rest of the drawing, any of the other lines that are horizontal are just going to go to the appropriate vanishing point depending on which side of that corner of the barn that they're actually on. So the top line of the door is going to go to the vanishing point. The bottom line obviously already does because it's the bottom of the barn. But we'll put this in here and determine the width, and then put another vertical on the other side. And then any lines that you have that are horizontal, again, it's important to remember that they will return to the vanishing point. So if we have a line that's low on this door. You can see I'm drawing one here, and then if there's one high on the door, we draw one there. And if you had a bunch of lines, each one would just continue on from the right hand side wherever you decide it starts to that vanishing point, and that would get well established. Now if there are windows on the side and they happen to all be the same size, the longest lines are going to be toward the front, because that's where you're standing, is looking right at that corner. But just like everything else, the bottom of those are going to go to the vanishing point, as well as the top of those. And I'll just draw right on through here, and just create these horizontal lines, and then I can drop in these verticals with a couple of few windows. And we'll just come back and darken in those horizontal lines. Getting a little fussy here. It's really not necessary. And if you were doing a painting, you just really want to capture the bones of this, not really a whole lot of detail in the beginning stages, because you're going to be painting in and around it. Okay, for this part of the painting, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you. I'm going to put a hill actually in front of the horizon line, and I'm actually going to put the house or the barn so that it's actually sitting up on the hill, which will show you what it's like when all of the lines are basically above the horizon. Just give you a quick demonstration here of what that looks like. So here you can see that the hill is actually hiding the horizon line, but we don't want to lose track of it, because one of our vanishing points, the one on the right hand side, is actually going to be key to developing the right hand side of this barn. And when we had our barn down here on a really low horizon, these lines that were on the bottom of the barn were actually going at a pretty sharp angle up to the right and to the left toward the vanishing points. In this case, they're actually going to be going down, and that's important to know, because your brain might be telling you that because you drew it before below the horizon line, that bottom of the barn should actually be going up, when indeed it's got to follow the same rules. So it's actually going to be going down toward the horizon line, not toward the vanishing point, not up. So here you can see that I'm actually drawing it in a downward direction. That's the interesting thing about linear perspective, for artists. Sometimes it can be challenging, because they are definite rules, and in order for things to happen accurately, they have to be followed as rules. And I don't know if you're like me, but sometimes I'm not a fan of rules. So anyway, that's another story. So here I'm just getting my lines in for that left side, and you can see I've sort of switched the barn around. It's going in the opposite direction than it was going before, the direction that the front of it's actually facing. But I'm just following the same steps, finding that peak at the middle of that line, bringing that peak down, and then I'll carry the roof line next, to the vanishing point on the left-hand side this time. Again, using my brush as a guide. And I'll just darken that in for clarity. And I'm just wiping out with a little bit of terps some of these lines, just so you can see the barn's sides a little easier. And I guess I did this just because I felt like it. I'm just sort of indicating a road coming up the hill, making a couple turns toward the barn. Just helps explain this whole scene to you just a little bit more. And I'll just try and wipe out this horizon line just for clarity. But in general, I don't know, I'm just making a mess, but that's okay. As long as you understand the concepts here, that's all that really matters. Once you establish that first vertical line in the corner, all lines left of it go to the left vanishing point, and all lines right of it go to the right vanishing point. All right, so thanks for checking out We Learn Wednesday on Sunday, and hopefully this week I can get back to a normal schedule and everything will happen as it usually does. If you'll practice some of these rules, just make yourself a drawing with a horizon line, move the building around so you can get a feel for where those, how the lines should go to the vanishing points. And next week I'll maybe do two buildings, probably at different angles. Like if they're on a farm, sometimes they don't necessarily build on a grid. They just put the building where they need it, and you see that a lot. So we'll see how that plays out, and we'll go from there. So until then, I will catch you later.